Welcome to the Queen City Music Podcast, the podcast devoted to the local music scene in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, here's your host, Matthew Ablan.
Hello and welcome to episode 65 of the Queen City Music Podcast. This episode of the Queen City Music Podcast is sponsored by Middle Sea Jazz, Charlotte's premier jazz club located at 300 South Brevard Street in Uptown Charlotte. Stop in for Thursday night jazz jams, gospel Sundays every third Sunday of the month, or bi-weekly Wednesdays for Remember Wednesdays. But if you prefer, stay in for the evening and watch their Saturday night live stream, where you'll have access to the best performances Middle Sea Jazz has to offer. And if you want the VIP treatment, get a Baby Grand membership, where life takes you to a higher note. Tickets are now available for Adam Hawley, who is 10 times named the #1 contemporary jazz guitarist. February 4th, award-winning breakout artist Patrick Lamb. February 17th, Jacob Webb, who is 6 times named the #1 Billboard recording bassist. On February 24th and 25th, Eric Darius, who is named Debut Artist of the Year by Smooth Jazz Magazine. And if you're in the need for a new instrument or accessories, head over to Midwood Guitar Studio, Charlotte, North Carolina's own boutique guitar shop located in Plaza Midwood. Midwood Guitar Studio not only has the finest selection in boutique guitars, but familiar names like Fender, Martin, Taylor, Two Rock, and many others. Whether it's a guitar, bass, amp, effects pedal, or a much-needed accessory, the knowledgeable and friendly staff at Midwood Guitar Studio will help guide you in the right direction for your next purchase. And if you're in need of some repairs to your instrument, Midwood Guitar Studio now has a luthier on staff. Visit their website at midwoodguitarstudio.com or stop in to see their unique shop at 1517 Central Avenue, Charlotte, North Carolina. This month on episode 65 of the QCMP, I'm speaking with Lowcats, an enigmatic duo whose music can best be defined as lo-fi indie pop. Chris and Paul from the Lowcats, welcome to the Queen City Music Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for reaching out. It's so nice to meet younger players, musicians who are in the music scene that I might not normally meet unless I'm doing the podcast. So, all right, let's start it off. Are you guys originally from the Charlotte area?
I am. We're both from Virginia, different parts of Virginia originally. I've been in Charlotte for, I guess, 10 years or so.
Yeah, and I was right behind you, moving just a few months after you were down this way. We were actually both making DC. Chris was based in Baltimore. I was in the DC area.
Yeah.
Chris was making an hour drive every day to come down to make music with me. And then after playing for a while, he actually got a cool job coming down and working at a studio, GAT 3 in town.
Yeah, I know GAT 3.
Yeah. So Chris was working over there, and then I was bouncing all over the place. At one point, was living up in Detroit. Did a mini tour. Mm-hmm. Chris and I were not making music together at this point. There was a little hiatus in our partnership, and then a show got canceled last minute. I was swinging through Charlotte and said, "Hey, I know some people here. Let me just contact them, see some old friends." I knew that Chris had just moved down here. Mm-hmm. And it was almost instant. I was like, what the heck am I doing in Detroit? I need to be in Charlotte. This is way more fun. And we've been here ever since, really.
Huh. And have you guys, what's your musical backgrounds, Paul?
Entirely self-taught. It was one of those things where I would kind of noodle around, fronted a band when I was very young, grew up doing vocals. Thankfully have stopped doing that. I found people more talented than myself to surround myself with. But yeah, it was one of those things where as a late teenager, I'd always kind of had a musical ear, had messed around with a couple things, but took it very seriously. Mm-hmm. And to make up for lost time, just started playing 5 or 6 hours every day. You meet a girl in college who says, "I think it's really cool when guys play the guitar." And that was kind of as cliched as it is. That's all it took.
And it starts a lot like that sometimes.
Yeah.
And Chris?
More or less the same thing, really. I mean, I started playing music in, middle school band. And by that time, once that happened, it was like nothing else. I became such a hermit because that's all I was doing was just sitting in the house playing guitar and singing, fronting a band. And, I was in Roanoke, Virginia for a while. Mm-hmm. And it kind of became apparent that the band that I was in was, it just wasn't really where I wanted to be. We were a very successful cover band, and that's not really what I wanted to do. So I moved to Baltimore to go to school for recording, which is where I met Paul, and then got the studio job down in Charlotte. But yeah, I've been playing drums. I've gone back and forth between like every different instrument and all kinds of different bands.
Chris is one of those annoying people who can just pick up an instrument and figure it out very easily. Yeah.
I'm barely good enough. I'm confident as a drummer and I'm confident as a singer. Everything else, I'm really good at faking it. So
I can do that with anything with just about with strings on it. I can mess with, throw a piano in front of me, and when people say, "Oh, I'm not very good," no, I really mean I'm not very good. You know, I can basically pluck out some scales or some block chords, but that is it.
That was one of the learning curves with this project, was that I'm doing, pretty much all of the piano work.
Right.
And I only know my way around the piano just because I know my way around music, but I'm not a piano player at all.
Right.
So I had to kind of figure that out, because you got to be able to actually play, not just, mouse click and write some cool chords. You actually have to be able, it's got to sound authentic. It's got to or otherwise it's just boring, you know, so.
Hey, just out of curiosity, Chris, where'd you go to school in Baltimore for recording?
It was called the Sheffield Institute of the Recording Arts. It's a mouthful.
Okay. So you've been doing it for a while, the recording process for a while?
Yeah. My first band, that I was in Virginia, we, recorded an EP, and I, hit it off with the engineer, and I was like, do you mind if I just come help you out or whatever? And he said, sure. And I was hooked. So.
When you got into recording, was it all digital at that point?
Yeah.
Or they were still starting to use tape?
No, they were, it was all digital, but I did, get to work with it in school a little bit, which was just, man, I'm so grateful that we don't have to do that anymore. Holy crap. It was just unbelievable. I mean, the idea of how much extra time it takes to comp a vocal or something where you got to cut the tape and tape it back together. Oh my God, just forget about it.
I never took any audio classes until much later in life, but when I went to grad school, they had a recording program, and it just made me think in the last few years, wow, those poor guys who went and learned all these other techniques, and now it's it's all digital, and they got to go through it. So
not just that, but even in the digital space, how quickly technology gets eclipsed. I mean, you can go to school for all of this, and I'm sure as soon as Chris was out, a lot of it was irrelevant very quickly. You have to stay on top of it because there's new iterations all the time. And
not to mention jobs. I would imagine, some people going to these schools, spending a lot of money, no offense, and then they get out and they might be sold something in school like, oh, we can get you a job in a studio. Yeah. And then you get out and you're like, oh, there are no jobs to really be had.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. It's tough because you like you said, you get excited about it. And I guess when I was in school for it, we were in that weird transitional period where people were starting to rely less and less on analog and more on digital. So it kind of became this weird transition where it was like, okay, well, if there aren't these people running around and these interns doing the patch bays and the tape and all of this, then that immediately eliminates a lot of jobs that are available to people. So you just have to I think that's where I ended up finding I bounced around at a few different studios in Charlotte, and then it was just I don't think this is going to happen for me unless I just do my own thing. So I built a studio in Fort Mill and have been running that for, I guess, the past year. A
separate studio or just a home studio?
It's a separate studio. It's a separate building on the property.
Oh, that's great, man.
Yeah.
Wow. How about you, Paul? Did you get into any recording at all?
No. I thankfully teamed up with someone at an early age in Chris who knew how to handle all of that. I definitely know my way around very basic controls when it's Chris's turn to track.
Yeah.
But outside of that, no. I think
Any interest in learning how to do it more, or?
no, honestly, as long as I have a basic understanding and I'm not completely embarrassing myself in there, it's nice to know a few basics here and there. But by and large, I think we understand where our skill sets lie.
Yeah.
For example, Chris really has a finely tuned ear for this. I trust his judgment a lot. There are oftentimes things where he'll handle the mixing after a certain point, and I know the direction he's going to go in. I trust the direction he's going to go in. And then on the reverse side, if it comes to things that are maybe a little bit more left-brained and it comes to some of the marketing endeavors that we have, that's something where I'll take a little bit more of the reins. And so it's really just kind of feeling out where we have our strengths and then just relying on each other. Yeah. It's a really successful partnership in that way.
It never ceases to amaze me, and I'll get into it a little bit more later with you guys, but how musicians today have to wear so many different hats. I mean, you wish you could just sit there and record and somebody would record you and you don't have to worry about that. But all right, Chris is handling all these recording stuff. Paul's handling the social media kind of stuff. And you're like, oh, should we even have to do that? Shouldn't we have a guy or a gal to do this for us? I mean, but that's not the situation when you are, coming up today in music. It's like you are expected to do it as an independent.
Yeah, we learned that really quickly and had that conversation a couple of times because I think both of us were just like, I love writing music and recording music, and I just don't care at all about social media. But you have to. You just have to. There's no way, unless you're going to pay someone else to do it. But, if you want, if you have that kind of capital, go for it. But we could maybe pay somebody, but we'd be so ignorant that we wouldn't even know.
Are they doing a good job?
Are they doing a good job? Or so it was like, maybe I guess it's just worth us diving in and trying to actually figure out what this world is.
Yeah. Well, I'll get into the social media thing later. I just want to talk to you more about, how did you guys even come together? How did that happen?
The short story is Craigslist, but the long version was that
and we all know Craigslist is rather treacherous, trying to find other musicians.
Yeah, wow.
No joke.
I can't believe that worked out.
No, it was the freak 1 in 100 instance because, as you're all too familiar with, musicians are the least reliable people. So trying to get a team of creatives to work together, it's like herding cats. It's horrible. Yeah. So thankfully I found another reasonably responsible young adult who was willing to commute an hour every time that we were practicing. I mean, I got really lucky in that way. We just bonded over our similar music influences really quickly, though. I mean, I think coming in, it was obvious right away. Chris came into the project that I had already started with someone else. Mm-hmm. We had just come out with the debut EP, just 5 songs with that project. And I remember Chris coming in, and I was immediately blown away. He was a much more skilled musician. I would say, just based on how long I'd been playing music, I think I've always had a stronger suit in the writing and composition part of it. But he just came in as this highly proficient drummer, the best I'd ever worked with up until that point. And so it was a no-brainer for me. And thankfully, he liked the sound. He liked what we were doing. As he mentioned earlier, he was excited to write original music, not just be in a cover band. And there was so much emphasis on pushing each other creatively that he and I just kind of hit it off, and it was off to the races.
Very cool.
And I came in as a to fill in because their drummer couldn't go on tour.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I was just going to be like a fill-in drummer, and then it was like this chemistry just is pretty great.
And this is in Charlotte where you guys met?
This was in D.C.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yep.
Interesting. And then you both wound up coming to Charlotte together or separately?
Independently.
Mm-hmm. I got a studio job down in Charlotte. So I essentially left, and at some point they were kind of on this like mini
East Coast tour,
and they came through Charlotte, and we all hung out, and it was like, oh man, this is like, and they were, I think
it's like reuniting with a long lost love. It sounds so stupid, but we hung out at a house party. Chris was playing music, we were having fun, and it was one of those things of like, you realize you've made a huge mistake. I was supposed to hang out with this guy more.
Yeah. And even that was happenstance because a date had gotten canceled.
Yeah.
That
was
the only
canceled.
reason they came through Charlotte. Yep. So there was like, well, our date here got canceled, so we're just going to come through Charlotte and just hang out for the night. And it was like, if that hadn't happened, I don't know that you would have come to Charlotte.
Yeah, not just that. We were so lucky to have a support network of friends who said, I don't care what it takes.
Yeah.
Come here, sleep on my couch, get a job in Charlotte, do whatever you want, which obviously is a lot easier to do when you're 20, 21 years old.
Sure.
But that's what I did. I came down, I crashed on my friend's couch, got networked into a job locally. Mm-hmm. Within 2 weeks, I was in my own place. And then shortly thereafter, Chris and I moved in together, actually.
And how long ago was this that you got?
10 to 12 years, something like that.
So the music scene was not even that banging back then. Like there wasn't like,
no.
Well, I got here a bit before you guys. So I got here in 2006 and there was a couple of places. There was like the Double Door and a Visualite and all those kind of little things that local musicians used to play at. And they were kind of in there. If you were in the scene, you were in the scene and you played there. Mm-hmm. But as Charlotte started to grow and you got breweries and clubs and restaurants, like I think the scene started to explode a little bit more with people moving here and more opportunities for people to play.
Definitely. Honestly, we would play a couple shows locally, but our main thing was playing on the road.
Yeah.
Yeah. We would just book these mini tours, team up with other smaller bands, be it from like the Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina area, and just go out and play on the road because it was a lot easier. You'd find venues that were willing to work with up and coming artists a lot more so, at least on more favorable terms and things. So, and I think especially knowing that we had the ability to, there was such a romance to, we're touring. We're doing it. We're going all the way up and down the East Coast. This is what you're supposed to be doing.
We're in a junk car. Yeah. Truck, piled in together, smelling and not bathing for 3 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a little more romantic than it sounds. Or actually.
Barely.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So, and you guys mentioned before we started recording that you guys actually were playing heavier music than what you do now.
Yeah. We had, there was, we came up in like the heyday of pop punk with, the Paramours and the stuff like that. And I think that's kind of where we started. And then we kind of just progressively started to experiment with some heavier sounds. We also experimented with some like dancier, poppier sounds. I think we were going through a real identity crisis. We were really trying to figure out like what our play. Maybe we were just bored and we just couldn't admit it. We don't really know.
Did you fall out of love with the pop punk kind of thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we had moved on from it. I think we were over the pop punk thing. We were trying to just kind of maybe be a little more mature, be more experimental, and just excite ourselves about the genre again.
Yeah.
And some of that involved some experimentation with some heavier music. Sometimes it went into a dancier route. So it was kind of all over the place.
It sounds so self-serious to say, I'm 25 now. I'm a little too mature for pop punk.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and at this point, funny enough, it's a nostalgia act.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of got this resurgence right now where people are coming back out and we played with a lot of those bands when we did a couple Warped Tour shows and things like that. So yeah, it's very interesting to see all of that come full circle because I remember being in high school and having that be at its zenith.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now I'm looking at it like, whoa, I'm way too old for this. And how is this cool again? And you guys don't know what you're talking about, you know?
I'm just curious. You guys were in a band. Mm-hmm. How many piece was the band?
It would fluctuate, but there was always 3 members at its core. The 2 of us and the vocalist.
Okay. So then you start moving on from the band situation. How does it just become you guys doing Lowcats?
I mean, again, a lot of it was just coincidence because he had moved out to Portland, Oregon, and then came back for my wedding where he met his now wife.
Oh, wow.
And when he came back to visit her, we both, got together and had a drink, and we were talking about different musical ideas that we had been trying to explore. Mm-hmm. And it just happened to be that we were both on the exact same path. We were both like really into this particular lane of music, and which was really strange. It was really so coincidental because it wasn't rock. It was like way far away from that. It was like this neo soul, chill hop, bedroom pop type of thing that we were both really, really into. And it was like, I'd love to figure out how to do that. And we were both like, yeah, let's do that. So as soon as he knew he was coming back to Charlotte, it was like, it's on, you know.
And what was this natural progression away from the rock? Had you guys just started, as most musicians do, we listen to a wide range of music, right? So I'm listening to blues rock, I'm listening to flamenco, I'm listening to classical. Is this just something that pops up on your Spotify, or is it just certain artists that you liked and you tracked, you know, to see what they were listening to in those sounds?
I think part of it had to come from drawing from the earlier point. You just surround yourself with it so much that you get a little burnt out from it.
Yeah.
So you're craving something different. And the counter to all of that was something, instead of being so loud, brash, technical, assertive, perfectly in tune and in time, I wanted something that felt organic, smooth, soft, sexy, and all of these things were just so appealing. And I think it's also a maturity thing. You come into a point in your life where you kind of have this self-realization of, I don't think I'm that angry all the time. I don't think I'm that angst-filled all the time.
Yeah.
And so this was something that just reflected another phase of life.
Yeah.
And so that was really easy to get into because, as he's saying, you know, he was just getting married. I was meeting my wife and getting to know her. And so these themes of love and relationships that are so much more sung about in that genre just felt like it reflected a lot more of what I was going through at that point in my life. And then just the sounds that felt like the maturing that I felt like I was going through. It also happened to be that there was this huge neo-soul renaissance that was going on.
Right.
Artists like Tom Misch really emerging from the scene. Jordan Reiki.
No idea how to say it.
Yeah. But these artists were really coming up, and there was something that was so attention grabbing because they pulled from so many different influences, but still made it sound modern, still made it sound fresh. So I think there's something with our generation where it definitely grabbed a subsect of us. And thankfully we both really united over that.
So you guys come together, start writing this music. At what point does the light bulb go off and go, I think we're kind of on to something. We're kind of on to...
Very early on.
Yeah.
It was like, actually, the song Space was the second thing that we ever wrote.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it was like, man, this is actually kind of good. Like maybe we can actually do this.
Yeah.
'Cause you really don't know, especially when you've spent so much time like in a totally different genre and you're trying to write and you're trying to learn this world. And you like to think that you can be objective about what is good and what isn't, but ultimately you're stumbling trying to find your way. So when we wrote this song together and we were like, man, this like actually might work. It was really, really exciting. And at that point it was like you couldn't stop us. We were just writing all the time. We were super excited because it didn't take us 10 songs to find our stride. We kind of hit it pretty much off the bat.
Right.
So it was a really exciting time.
Yeah, that's such a good example because I brought the rhythm guitar part of that song to Chris and said, I think this is something. And he heard it, and we're usually pretty good about identifying each other's good ideas. He heard it. He was also excited by it. Wrote this bass part that almost acts as more of a lead in the song. And then after that was laid down, put a piano part over top of it. And once we heard those three parts click together, the space that they made, how smooth, how beautiful it all was with all these wonderful counter melodies playing off of each other. That was it. We knew that we had something. And like Chris is saying, even if we struggled for a while after that, you had that thing that was the example to say, okay, it's hard, but we know we can do this.
Sure.
And so that was the thing that was the anchor to say, okay, we need to keep writing. We need to keep exploring. And while we kept tooling and figuring out our sound, there was that evidence that said we're gonna have something real on our hands.
And it sounds like you guys just organically started to fall into your natural roles. Like I'm doing this and I'm going to do this, and then it just starts to fit. And you find out, working together, how it all fits together.
Yeah.
And whose part, this is my part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think we are both, I'm so grateful that we are both really pretty good at being objective about, I mean, we did it just this past session. We were working on a song and I was like, I was trying to figure out these guitar chords, and I was like, why am I doing this? Like, you take the guitar because like you're better at this.
Damn it, you should know this.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so it's we're really good about kind of knowing what we're good at, but we also there's such a level of trust where like we're both also, I think, pretty good about not being like tied to our parts or tied to our roles or whatever. So if he comes in with a guitar part and I'm just like, I'm not digging that, then he's just like, cool, let's do something else then. Like we both, there's such a level of respect that we're able to kind of play around with those roles a little bit. And it's always an experiment, you know, trying to work it all out.
Well, you guys mentioned it. How did this first track you sent over, Space? How did this come together? Was it just the guitar part?
So started with the rhythm guitar part. I wanted something that just had smooth flowing jazzy progression. So it's kind of these lush chords underneath. And this was again, finding my voice as the guitar player in this project had a lot to do with that soulful, I think of the sevenths and ninths and 11th chords that just all draw from this very soulful sound. That was the thing that was really inspiring me. It still to this day does. And when I brought that to Chris, we were using the most ghetto rigged operation in my apartment. I'm sure bothering my neighbors, but we just managed to, using these caveman resources, slap just the basic demos together in these apartment sessions. And that's the building blocks of everything. It's so crazy to think about the evolution of this track because it started as just that. If you listen, it is that same chord progression as the root of this entire song. That's the foundation of it. And then everything that dances around it, including the lead that kind of helps elevate the whole track in the chorus. There's still that same loop going through, but it's harmonically complex enough and interesting enough that I think it just has a momentum that makes you want to keep listening to it.
Awesome. Well, I'll tell you what, can we take a listen?
Yeah.
All right, let's listen to Space by Lowcats. Guys, that's a real interesting track, and we talked about this tune before we started recording. So first off, you sent me the quote-unquote extended version. Yeah. What makes it so much more extended than previously?
I think we in this whole endeavor, we've kind of we've learned somewhat how to trim the fat, and sometimes there are things that we really like, but it's not really adding anything. And you know, we talked earlier about being objective and not being tied to anything. Nothing is too precious. Right. So you have to just objectively look at it and say, okay, this is cool, I like it, but it's not serving the song in the best way that it could. So in the original version of the song, there's this long lead up that kind of sounds like it might be like the intro to an EP or something, where it's you got this pad, and then you which is still in the song, and then you have the sound of we recorded me actually turning on my own record player at the house, and when you do that, the vinyl crackle comes in, and it's kind of setting the stage for what the song is going to be. But once we started kind of getting into this whole thing, we kind of started to realize that whole intro is kind of cool, but it's not really adding much other than maybe a little bit of intro atmosphere. So let's just maybe cut that out. And we both agreed that when we did it, it was like, we're not cutting it if it loses any of the essence of the song. So we have to make sure that whatever we do, we stay authentic to the song. So that was what we did.
So I've just played the intro. So if you want to listen to the quote unquote release version, you have to go on Spotify and check out the release version. So go listen to it, check out the comparison and see which one you like, because we had a conversation before we recorded about just like long intros and things like that versus what's going on today, which is boom, straight into the song or straight into the chorus, however you want to do it, and to catch people's ears, because our attention span seems to be less and less these days.
That's it. If you hear 15 seconds of vinyl crackle, are you really going to stick around?
Yeah.
And so that's the thing, is just being conscious of the listener and what you may be up against. There could be some finale of a song that just came before you that was just, huge harmonies, everything was blaring, and then it gets to this weird static sound, and maybe you think, is there something wrong with my phone? So we had to recognize that maybe that was something that's a little more self-serving. And while we still think it sounds great, I still stand behind it, the musical decision. Just being aware of your song out in the ethos, independent of any pretext that you may have for it.
As far as lyric writing, is that a group effort, or is it one person mostly does the lyrics?
It's pretty much me.
Okay.
We're working on one now that was Paul's idea. That was super fun. But for the most part, it's me writing, and Paul will obviously have his critiques, and will change some words or some rhythms of things from time to time. But for the most part, it's me doing it.
So when you're writing the lyrics, is the music first, or have you written lyrics previously and you're trying to match the music? Because at least for me, when I've written stuff, I always have to have the music first. At least main sections, and then it starts rolling. You come up with a melody for the lyric. How is it for you guys?
I think for the most part, it's music first. There's one song that we have out called Want that I was coming back from a practice with him.
Yes.
And I ran the chorus for that song randomly popped into my head, and I was just singing it to myself over and over and over again on the way home, because I didn't want to forget it, because everybody does that. You have this great idea and then you forget it 10 minutes later.
Of course.
So I really didn't want to forget it, but that's the only instance I think that I can think of where it was lyrics or vocals first. But
so you guys are releasing Space. It's a single. Was there a thought as to why you want to release a single instead of trying to put a group of songs together for an EP or maybe a full-length album?
Yeah. So I would say the thought process behind it is, again, just kind of keeping in mind what the modern music marketplace looks like. If I put a collection of 5 songs out there, and even if I'm promoting one as this is a single off of it, by the way, here's the rest of it. We took incredible care on each one of these songs. These are our carefully crafted babies. And so we felt like in this age of streaming, it's very rare that somebody just goes on and listens to a full record. I mean, we're used to that. But instead, I can put an individual marketing push behind each one of these. I can maintain attention and focus on all of our social channels by saying, here's the next one that's coming out. And we can do things that help support it. Hey, this is an upcoming single. Here's a video of us playing the instrumentals for it. Here is a snippet of it. And it just managed to maintain attention rather than be a flash in the pan to say, here's the EP, and in a month from now, nobody's still listening. Now we have it so that people are continually revisiting, and then you have things of, we release maybe 2 singles at a time, was something we experimented with, to pitch to the fan base, which one do you like better? You're playing off of people comparing your old to your new single, and then constantly getting the repeats just by saying, oh, I'm listening to this one, but 2 months ago they released that other track. Let me go back and listen to that one. And so it kind of helped a lot with the play count, a lot with people engaging with us more so. So
when you guys released this, what year was this? Was this last year?
This was this year.
Yeah, this year. This is the first single this year.
Yeah.
Okay, so we release you release Space in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
How many songs are you writing at the same time as Space? Had you written a group of songs already, or had you just written Space and said, let's put this out?
No. Well, like I said, Space was the second song that we did.
Yeah.
I think we probably had like 18 songs.
Yeah, something in that.
Wow.
By the time we figured out, like, obviously some of them have gone away. You kind of pick and choose. But I think it was what we knew that what we wanted to do was we knew we were going to do singles, but we wanted to have some kind of backlog so that we had like I think by the time Space came out, that was the third song that we released.
Okay.
And we released 2 songs at first, then Space was our third, but we already have like 3 or 4 songs in the wings waiting to go. So we're never like really like stressed for time. We have everything mapped out and planned out so we can just kind of do it comfortably.
Okay. And how many songs have you released this year?
We just did our 5th. We had a Christmas song, so that's kind of a bonus, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, 4 originals.
And how far are you spacing them out, just out of curiosity?
Roughly
6 weeks.
6 weeks between each.
Wow.
Yeah. So giving it like a single treatment.
Yeah.
Yep. And like Chris was saying, I think another reason to kind of bank them all was to compare. We have a collection of songs, and even though they're being released as singles, we know that to the listener, this will be treated as a collection of songs that represents a moment in time for this project.
Yeah.
So you are taking into account, does this all feel cohesive? Does this mark the kind of sound that we want to put out right now? And even though there are some that we really liked, we know that those are things that might play better a little later down the line. And these are the ones that all felt like this covers the spectrum of what we want to say. Like, look at the range of things that we can do now. And all of these feel, even melody, lyrically, like there's cohesive themes between all of them.
I was going to ask you that because when you write songs, if maybe the listener doesn't really realize it, but you write them in a span of time, and your mood, your reflections, how you feel, whatever's happening to you in life at that time goes into those songs. And those were songs, for whatever reason, they seem like they feel as a group. They work together. So now when you release the songs, as Paul was saying, now they have that cohesiveness that holds them together, that sound. Have you guys started writing some more stuff, some newer stuff that kind of is a little different from this period of time that you've started writing stuff that you've released?
Yeah. I mean, not like, because the songs that we've released already are so recent, I think we're still kind of in that headspace of those songs. So I wouldn't say it's like an enormous departure, but you can definitely sense a little bit of a shift. And you're also kind of influenced just by the like Paul was saying, the feedback that you get, you kind of can't help but be a little influenced by it.
Yeah.
So it's been kind of interesting. I think the one that we're kind of really jazzed about right now is much like dancier, but it kind of plays into the introverted side of, someone who doesn't want to play in that world.
Right.
So that's been kind of an interesting, because I think a lot of times we try to be very just emotionally honest with a lot of the songs. And so it's been kind of fun to play in this like tongue-in-cheek kind of world. So yeah, we're always kind of experimenting.
Interesting. And as you start to release stuff, are you thinking still down the road you're just going to keep releasing singles?
I think it also kind of reflects where we are in that the first single was released at the end of September. So this is in its infancy as far as everyone who's first finding us.
Right.
So because of that, yeah, we'll play the single thing for a little while. We've seen a really wonderful amount of support for just what we've come out with so far. Mm-hmm. So if that trend continues, I think we definitely put a concerted effort behind an album. I know we're both excited by the idea of larger concepts that connect a whole album in theme. But for the time being, this makes a lot of sense for where we are. And if there's enough generated interest, that's when we'd kind of make the effort to say, okay, cool. Let's sit down. Let's actually bank a whole bunch of things and put something out that has a little more deep connection with 10, 12, whatever it be, tracks.
Well, I think in the long run, if you guys ever decided to do it, you have these periods, like you were just talking about, of these songs that are cohesive, and you can always just say, we're going to put this together, and this is going to be the album that we release, and we're just putting them together in a package. So there's going to be pictures or whatever, however you release it. I mean, putting a modern spin on it, I'm not really sure that people have the wherewithal to listen to a whole album anymore. Like, I know even me, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm listening to something at the gym. Oh, let me check out this artist. I don't like that tune. Let me skip through it.
We are in the world of the playlist now.
Right.
And that's just kind of how music is at the moment. So you kind of have to play that game a little bit. And I think that was a little bit of an adjustment because we, like Paul said, we are typically fans of concepts. So I think that's where that intro for that song kind of came in. It was like, well, I like setting up this world, but it doesn't work in the playlist world. Yeah. It might work. Maybe that extended version will be on the future EP, hypothetically, that we put together or something, because then it would make sense. Like you said, if we do group those songs together, then it is a concept. It's been a weird process trying to figure out how all of that fits together and staying authentic to yourself.
Sure. And we talked about it. Speaking of playlists, we talked about it earlier. How are we defining this genre or the style that you guys are putting out?
I will happily go into a bunch of adjectives and descriptors, but only if you can then help us in maybe providing feedback of what first comes to mind for you. So to us, the influences range from so many things. There's elements of post-rock in here. Things like we both have a huge affinity for Tides of Man, which is an instrumental, progressive post-rock group. Mm-hmm. And I think you can hear that influence plainly on the outro of Space, of Feel. It's obviously there. And then there's lots of neo-soul. There's lots of bedroom pop. I think the easiest way to say it is just indie pop. It is taking a unique approach to something familiar. And that's the easiest way to summarize what it is that we're trying to do.
In a sense, I can't even say a pop.
Okay.
I mean, in my head, I couldn't even use the word pop. Mm-hmm. The long intro with the sound effects brings me back to Pink Floyd. Mm. Yeah. The mellowness reminds me of just atmospheric type of music, really laid back. But yet you also have a dance quality to it. Mm-hmm. So I guess pop would define it, but it doesn't feel like poppy.
Agreed.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that's a great way. That's how we look at it. It's definitely some subversion of pop.
Yeah. Right.
But it is not poppy by any real sense.
Yeah. I think you picked up too there's a melancholy underpinning to almost everything here.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is that we had talked about it earlier, just as you release stuff in today's market, in today's world of music, man, it is like shouting into the void. But I think people are going to find what they like by listening to one artist, and the playlist might be a wonderful thing where I like this. What else is available in that style or similar styles? Mm-hmm. And then boom, the Lowcats pop up and you're like, oh, this is something different. I like this.
I like to think that if it's real and it's authentic, because I think people are more perceptive of that than I think we give them credit for.
Yeah.
And I think if it's real, people will buy it. I like to think so anyway. So I think we just have to constantly kind of stay. I don't even know how we wouldn't. How we would not be like authentic to ourselves. Like I don't even know what it would look like if we tried to like, well, let's write a pop song because that will be successful and we'll follow this formula, because I don't even know how to do that. I think it's just like, I think it's just one of those things, like as long as you're real and you're authentic, which is what we try to do, then if I like it, I like to think someone else will like it. So,
but that's the thing though, if you're not authentic, I think that comes across. And if you are authentic, it's something that people can latch onto and you feel it. I think when you release things that are inauthentic and you are releasing things in a specific genre to sound like a certain thing, that's where a lot of groups fall to the wayside. And then you take a specific genre. Let's say, for example, thrash metal. All right. Well, there's 3 or 4 bands that made it out of that genre. The top being Metallica. Sure. Second being Megadeth, and third being you could say Slayer. Okay. Those 3 bands were the top 3. Everybody else kind of didn't hit the mark. So whatever genre's coming out, when people latch onto it and they like it, they're not the originators. Right. They're people who liked it and they kind of jumped into that thing. And I don't want to say they're inauthentic, but since they were not the originators and that's not what came out, they got attracted to that music and released afterwards. And I think the people who are memorable are the first couple of bands that really hit the mark in that style.
Yeah. I think that strongly resonates. You think of the grunge movement, it's the same kind of thing. If you think so many examples where the first to market, those are the people, because you're saying you weren't a direct ripoff of anything. This is clearly coming from a space of originality. I would hope that there's some element of clearly we're trying to do our own thing and maybe even just, demonstrating it's kind of hard to describe exactly what genre it is evidence that we're just making music that sounds good to us.
Well, I mean, if it's any consolation, I mean, I'm going to claim ignorant. You guys sent me your stuff. And as soon as I got it, I was like, oh, I like this. I don't know a whole bunch about the other genre. Like I can only say this is the first stuff I've listened to from anybody in that style. So to me, I'm like, oh wow, this is really cool. You guys might be able to list off 5 other bands that I should listen to. But I might be like, I listen to Lowcats and that's the first thing that I listen to. And I'm kind of liking that.
To that point, I think so often, have you ever gone to one of your favorite bands? I'll use Nirvana as an instance. I remember going through and saying, as a teenager, nothing spoke to my soul more than this sound. And so I just was like, well, how did this come about? And so I just went through and started researching what they had listed as all of their influences.
Traced it back, yeah.
Right. But to me, it felt like there was a huge disconnect. To the artist, I think that you can draw an easy line from A to B to say, I heard this style sound and it made me, but that's just it. If you have that original force inside of you, there's always going to be this separation, this next step that you took, this thing where you departed, you went, left instead of where everyone else went right. And you can hear that. And that's where the thing is, where there is no clear A to B here.
Well, you are not that person who wrote that original stuff.
Right.
You listened to it, got turned on to it. Now it's entering you. And then when you create your own music, it comes out of you. So you're putting your own spin on it, as it were. This is, for example, you listen to English blues players from the 60s and 70s who listen to American blues players, the black originators.
Yep.
And what they did, they just put their spin on what they thought blues were.
Absolutely.
Trying to copy what John Lee Hooker and the greats did back then.
Sure.
Say, we're going to do this. So it's never going to sound the same, but sometimes what comes out, you might like better. Or an audience might like better than the originators.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think you can't help but like kind of bring your own previous influence into it. We came into this genre as rock people, so we kind of, I think there's more guitar influence in our stuff than I think might be in some of the other examples in this genre, and because that's our comfort blanket.
Sure.
So we start there. And it's such a big part of who we are and who we came up as musicians.
Yeah.
That is an absolute staple in our music. Pretty much all of the time there's guitar, right?
I would say the only time that we'll take it out is for effect so that something can feel really basic, and it's only to make it sound all the more big when the guitar is reintroduced.
So the latest release that you guys have is the track Feel that you sent over.
That's right.
Okay. When did you release this?
This was on Tuesday, December 20th was when it came out.
Okay. And what's the push behind this one that you were writing? How did this one start?
Oh man, this one was all over the place.
This is our tortured science experiment. This is a weird Frankenstein's monster. I think most of the things that we come up with have a natural energy that just the momentum carries it from start to finish. And this was the first one where we sat there and said, we know there's something here, but the sounds, the synths, the different motifs that are going on throughout it were new enough to us that this took a lot of reworking. I would say there are 5 to 6 versions of this song that previously existed before we finally said, we're happy with this. So this was a labor of love, but it's kind of poetic that this is the last thing to come out because this is the thing that took the most care to really get it right.
It's interesting you say that because when I listened to the track, it sounded like, don't take this the wrong way, it sounded more polished than some other previous tracks that you've done. Am I wrong in that?
I think that's correct. I think you can hear how much work went into this song.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, we were done with this song. And then I think there was just one random day where we were just like, these drums are just, something is not working about this song. And I think it's the drums. And we ended up scrapping all of the drums and just starting over. But anytime you change one element of something, it changes the way the other elements around it kind of exist. So you then we have to like relook at this. And I think in the original song, there's a guitar line that Paul had written it, and it plays in this version, in the released version, it's a trumpet, but it was originally a guitar, and it sounded super cool, and we really liked it. But then it was like, after we reworked it so many times, it started to become a little bit more, I guess, maybe mellow in a way, and the guitar was maybe a little too brash. So that was when we said, well, why not a trumpet? A trumpet could be cool. So we reached out, found a trumpet player, and there we are.
So you didn't do canned sound. You went straight out for a real person.
Yeah, we found a real guy in Charlotte who has his own recording set up, and we basically sent him the line, and he recorded a few different versions and sent it back to us, and it was great. So
that is the beauty of modern recording.
Yeah, true.
When I did my EP, I sent different tracks to different friends. Some folks came over and recorded, but I sent one to a violinist, Emmanuel Winter, and boom, he sent me back, and he's like, okay, I've added this and this and this. And I was like, went back, plugged it all in. I was like, oh, that's fantastic. Just the modern technology of being able to just email somebody tracks and then they send something back.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
I don't care what anybody says. I know there are amazing things that people can do with pre-recorded violins and trumpets, but I think especially with horns and strings, there's nothing that comes close to the organic sound.
That is the truth. Yeah. I believe it. Well, let's take a listen to Feel by the Lowcats.
tangerine and my hands didn't belong to me, and there were two moons in each sky, stretching the tides from opposite sides, and I could feel my mind's indecision on which riptide I'd come to reside in. If I ran away Like a coward I relent for reasons I don't understand yet. Or I could push the oar away in hopes that I might drift ashore and emerge self-assured.
Yeah, I really like this track. Particularly, I want to talk to you about the ending, the outro of the track. It's really thick. There's a lot going on. How did you come up with that as opposed to what was happening in the middle of the song?
I think a lot of it was kind of accident. Really, we knew the song ended with a chorus, and then it was like, well, how do we end it? And I think this happens so often with us, where like what probably happened because we were just looping. We had copied and pasted a shaker a whole bunch of different times, and so what probably happened is the song was playing, and and then it went to that solo shaker, and we were like, oh, well, that's kind of cool. What if we just like go into something like way different?
Totally new B section.
Yeah, and then he came up
building
with
this
bigger,
bigger,
plucky, delayed guitar that we were like, that's pretty rad. And we just kept building it, and it was just kind of, it was very organic the way it happened.
It reminded me so much of Pink Floyd when I was listening to it. You have that sequenced synth kind of sound, then the longer delayed chords coming in, and there's even, I think I heard real quick to think back, voice going.
Yeah,
like,
you caught that.
I was like, that's pretty neat, man.
Yeah, that was another accident. I think I just randomly did that, and Paul actually made me do it again because he liked it. So it was. So that's the second.
Well, that means if you're listening to this episode, you're going to have to go listen to the full version on Spotify because you just got a little snippet at the beginning. You didn't get the full song. Lyric wise, what's going on there?
That song kind of came from a place of like we've all had situations where it's like, I don't know how I feel about that.
Right.
But this kind of explored that, where I had a certain situation going on in my life, and I was really trying to figure out how I'm supposed to feel about it, how I do feel about it, what's the right way to feel about it.
Right.
So it's just kind of a lot of those different arguments that you have in your head sometimes. That's just, and man, the chorus on this song it's so silly because it's the simplest chorus ever. That just says, how do I feel? And the only reason that happened was because I was trying so hard to figure out what the chorus was going to be. And I was trying for like months to figure out what it was going to be. And then sometimes it just takes being as simple as like, just what am I trying to say? And right. Not being poetic, just what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, how do I feel? So that just ended up being what the chorus was because it just felt the most natural.
Interesting.
I think if you take the song from the very start, it paints, in my mind, almost like a Beatles-esque approach to, he says, you sound like you're lost in a dream of indecision and an inability to feel guided in any specific direction. So he says, wake me up. I was in a little dream where the grass was tangerine and my hands didn't belong to me, and all these things that assume a complete lack of control and ability to guide yourself. And then this beautiful metaphor that he paints where he says there were two moons and the tides were pulling me in opposite directions. And so it's just all these things of talking about. I think it perfectly reflects society at large to say there are clearly these incredible forces pulling me in opposite directions, and I don't know necessarily which one I'm supposed to go in. And all you know is that you feel tugged. You feel like you're not at ease because you don't know your place in the world. And I think he really poetically captures that sentiment.
Hence the title.
Yeah.
That's it.
And it, just judging from the lyric content, it's kind of gives you this progressive feel that I was saying, this Pink Floyd, you said, Paul, Beatlesque. It's not just like, I love you and this is the way it is. And it's like, it's a little more heady, there's a little more thought in the lyrics.
I mean, I think it was coming from a place of like, this is a world that I'm not used to. This is, this is like, I like to think that I'm usually pretty good at being objective and knowing how I feel about something. So I found myself in this weird foreign territory of like of trying to work out how I felt about this particular thing, and it was just unfamiliar and it was weird. So it was like, so yeah, I started to kind of paint this foreign world where, you know, the grass isn't green, it's tangerine, you know, all of these different weird things. And you know, like Paul said, where you've got all of these societal influences, and sometimes you kind of have to check in with yourself and make sure, like, are my thoughts my own, or am I being influenced? Do I actually feel this way, or do I feel that way because I've been influenced to feel that way? Which is where the "my hands don't belong to me" line comes from. It's like these thoughts I think are mine, but I need to check in and make sure that I'm being honest with myself.
Interesting. So I've got a quick question just to kind of delve away from music and back into the group. I've played in an acoustic cover duo for a good number of years with a buddy of mine. And I've come to the conclusion that I think, as much as I think I love trios, that duos are almost the perfect band, because you don't have to have a plethora of other opinions, personalities to deal with. If you have two people, it seems like a great act to be able to put together, because you just have two people to bounce ideas off of. And you start throwing a third or a fourth or even a fifth person into that mix with opinions, it starts to get really sloppy. But how do you guys feel about being in a duo as opposed to bringing other people into the mix to the band?
Just to start, this is by far the easiest songwriting relationship I've ever had. Like Chris was saying, I think it helps to have a very healthy respect for what your songwriting partner's strengths are, right. But also the fact that we come from similar enough roots to say, great, we both have a similar North Star, but also recognizing that the influences that he brings and what I bring, they're going to be slightly different colors, but man, the two color palettes just mesh well together. And you don't get this random, okay, we kind of have to make everything work because you have 4 or 5 competing opinions, and the best idea wins.
Right.
That's it. We pride ourselves on checking the ego at the door and saying, this is all in service of, this is going to be better because we're both doing this.
Yeah.
And that has helped in everything, in every disagreement about what could be. Also, I mean, we're just fairly easygoing. It helps that I'm not in my 20s and I'm not so attached to be like, it has to be this way. I don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there have been very few, like 2 or 3 situations where one of us was like, I feel strongly about this particular thing. It's usually like, it can be something else. It doesn't have to be this thing. And I might like it, but if you don't, then we both need to be on board. So we don't even spend time even really talking about it. It's just like, okay, well, let's brainstorm.
Right.
But to answer your question, the difference between that versus working in like a group, it's like you have to like, I think at some point you have to start kind of, the more people that are in the band, I think you have to relinquish more and more control. Like you have to, like you can't have ownership over every single thing. Whereas right now I feel like both of us we share the same amount of ownership on the whole project. But when you have so many different opinions, it's like, I can't fight every single opinion. So we just all have to just play our roles and just trust each other and hope that it comes out the best way that it can.
Yeah. Meanwhile, on this latest track that we're working on, we're passing the basses and guitars back and forth to each other.
There you go.
And so it's so fluid, and that's so much fun when you just feel so in sync with each other that you can just kind of pass things around and say, great, we're going to collaborate so that there is no clearly defined role on some of these things.
Right. And I think it's nice when you appreciate your partner's skill.
Yeah.
You know, this person does this really well, so I'm going to kind of, sit back a little bit and let them do their thing because I'm not that skilled at that, or I'm not that knowledgeable in that area.
I think that speaks to the to what you were saying about checking the ego at the door. It's like it's like I know that I'm good at certain things, but I know that he's better at at particular things. So it's like am I serving myself or am I serving the project? Am I serving the song? And the song is what's most important. So like, it's not even a question, you know, if sometimes it's fun to try it, but ultimately if we've spent, I mean, even 10 minutes on it and I'm not getting anywhere, then it's like, all right, you just handle it, because like that's what's the most important thing, is getting the song done.
Yeah. It's a hard thing working with other people. I don't think some people may realize already, you know, if you're not a musician, that's fine. You know, maybe you have to work in a group collective at work, at your job, and you have to collaborate with others. But I think in an artistic way, it's even more difficult because you have to relinquish control.
Control while you're doing something that feels so soul-bearing and vulnerable.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't think people understand, like, you know, you could write a guitar riff and guitar part and you come in and you're like so married to it. And then you come in, you know, and Chris is like, yeah, I don't even like that. And you're like, dude, I just spent the last 3 weeks honing this thing, getting it. And he's like, yeah, dude, I don't think that's going to work.
To Chris's credit, though, that's one of his abilities, is that he is able to spot the gem. So maybe I come in with the riff.
Yeah.
He says, but I want you to know that the first 2 seconds of that, there's something there. So you need to try harder and keep digging, because I think you can write something better than that. And so I think it's also figuring out how to communicate your creative differences. Yeah. We've gotten a lot better at that over time, for sure. Like Chris was saying a bit, like he understands that maybe where I'll understand chord voicings in a very unique way, and especially if we're trying to make something sound really lush, when it comes time to play the drums, I might start mouthing things at him, but pretty quickly when he starts getting into his own, I know to shut up, because he's going to put something together that is going to be so much more complex and serve a cool rhythm that I would have never conceived.
Now you guys are still at the outset of this. It's still in the infancy. So being in a duo, are you guys thinking about shows, or is this primarily a studio creation, Lowcats?
Definitely we want to do shows, for sure. I think that's been one of the biggest learning curves, is trying to figure out how to do a project like this live. Because obviously it's very doable. It's just that we've never really stepped into this world where you're kind of relying on loopers and computers and stuff like that. And we want to try to avoid just like playing to backing tracks. You know, we want to try to keep it as fresh and fun and exciting. So how do we bring the atmosphere and the vibe that we want, but keep it exciting for a show, especially when it's like just two dudes with a computer, you know? It's not like a band with like, you know, you can watch the guitar playing a solo and the drummer go, you know, it's like we got to be able to make it sound good, obviously, but we've got to keep it interesting, and we've got to do it kind of efficiently and effectively. And it's been a major learning curve. But yeah, it's definitely in the works.
I think the other thing was building out a set list, right? We just got it so that, including a cover or two, we're trying to lean on our originals. And so now that there are fully set in stone 5 originals, like we're ready to take those out. You know, this would be the phase of, you know, we're ready to shop this around.
Yeah. If you guys ever want to get out there, and you know, they have what is it? Stooges every Tuesday night. They do original music.
Oh, nice.
So I mean, it's a good place to kind of just cut your teeth on your show.
Yeah.
You know, and say, hey, this is the first time we're going to be doing this with the tracks and everything, and put it together. And I think if you're an opening group, you only have to do like a half hour.
Perfect.
So if you have enough material that you've gotten and you start to hone the show, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
You know, to get out there and do it. Not to mention, I think just being in a duo is a tough show anyway, because you don't have 5 people on stage, and you know, like you say, a drummer to look at and a guitar player to look at, and you know, it's like, what am I going to do that's so interesting? You know,
especially when you are kind of tied to, like, you know, a looper or, you know, certain things within the computer. It's not like you can walk around the stage and, you know, use the whole real estate of the stage. You're kind of like married to this little rug that you've set up for yourself, you know, and so it's tough. So I think it's probably going to look like it's probably going to look to be more intimate, you know. I don't think we're going to be playing Tremont. I think that would probably be very boring.
Yeah.
But you know, we just have to figure out a way to make it interesting. So
I think most non-musicians don't realize how different it is in different aspects of music. Going into the studio is just completely different than a live show.
Oh my
It is
gosh.
not. It's
Yeah.
not even close.
Even though I would say between the two of us that I'm more the extroverted one, and I do like that engagement.
Yeah.
There's nothing that gets me the same kind of sugar rush, giddy child, like excitement
Yeah.
as just being in the studio. Just the two of us. It's just the free flow of ideas. We're writing new music. I mean, we're fully cracked out when we're in that mode together, when we're in that creative space. And it's so much fun. It's so rewarding. And yeah, being in front of people, while it is really great to share your creations out in the wild, there's nothing that touches the original birth process for me.
Interesting. How about you, Chris?
I think for the most part, I definitely feel the same way. There is obviously a huge gratification from, playing a show and feeling like people are connected to what you're doing. It's different when you release something on Spotify and you can see, the views, but that's just a number.
Yeah.
When you actually hear that someone, or you see someone like digging on what you're playing, it's a pretty special feeling.
Sure.
But I am most at home in the studio. I'm in my most natural state when we are in the studio and we're going through all of these ideas, and it might be the simplest, dumbest idea, but when it comes together just right, it's like it's just the best thing ever.
Yeah.
But can you say that now because you haven't done a live show as Lowcats?
Probably. That's kind of what I'm thinking. I mean, we've obviously played live shows before, like in other projects.
Yeah.
So at least we have a little bit of an inkling of like, what that might look like. But yeah, we might be completely wrong.
Yeah, I think once you get out, I mean, you'll formulate a situation of how it works, how it's going to work for you guys. And you might be like, man, this is just another aspect that we hadn't thought about, our live show and just exuding the music instead of just, putting it down on recording.
Right.
As it were.
Yeah.
Lowcats become road dogs.
Wow.
So you mentioned it earlier, man, about just a few moments ago about listens on Spotify, which I'm always interested in, particularly asking younger musicians, what's the role of social media for you guys? Because everybody I've talked to, I think maybe there's one person I feel like has started to figure it out. I'm not saying they have a massive amount of success, but their promotion materials and everything has just gone a lot more next level than a lot of the other people I talk to. And if you know who Reese Raps is, I go to her Instagram page. The girl's got videos and the way she's posting live stuff. And I'm like, wow, she's got this together a little bit more. I'm like, here's a picture. Here are my dates. Here's a reel occasionally. What role is social media playing for Lowcats?
It's everything, especially in this landscape. I think, the end objective is to just get it out to as many people as possible.
Right.
And hoping that people connect to this thing that means so much to you. And for us, that takes the form, I would say a big thing that we're exploring and what's been most successful for us is finding the process of contacting and connecting with high-level Spotify playlists. So I'll give you an example. When we released one of the two first singles, I shopped this thing around like it was my second job. I was figuring out, okay, so in what lanes does this work? Spotify curators are pretty inaccessible. There's a very specific channel. So how do you go one step down from that and find these curators who maybe have 50,000 followers to make sure that you get good placement in the playlist, that people are going to connect with it because it matches a lot of what else is on that playlist.
Right.
This was a huge learning curve, but after exploring that for a while, you also find the kind of playlist that you need to apply to. You find the wording that it takes, and then you find the services as well, like Groover, like Submit Hub. These are things where you can take your single and very inexpensively shop it around to a ton of Spotify playlist curators, a ton of journalists, bloggers, things of that nature. That has been a huge success for us. That was how we were able to get tens of thousands of plays on these songs in just, the short time that we've been together, just by being really smart in who we target.
Interesting. You feel that paying for these kind of services is definitely worth the funds?
For me, let's say that you were a curator who had 100,000 people who were subscribed to your Spotify playlist. For me to submit something to you, depending on the site that I'm going through, costs between $1 and $2. Yes, that is 100% worth it.
It's such a different world today. You know, even, I don't want to bore listeners with it. When I was releasing my EP, I was like, oh, okay, you look at blogs and things like that. Like you just said this, all the stuff that is freaking Latin to me.
Yeah.
I have no idea what you're just talking about. Like I was thinking about blogs and I'm like, whatever, man. I'm just releasing it, which also makes sense because I didn't get as many listens as I thought I would. Mm-hmm. You know, and I'm like, okay, well, now the next material I release, I'll have to think about these other aspects and what didn't happen in this first release and what's going to happen in the next release.
Definitely. Yeah, I would be all too happy to, post podcast, go back through and talk marketing more and talk shop about that. But that was something that I had to learn, and I think it was just helpful to see what are these other people doing, what's making them successful. There's tons of resources out there. There are services that are a lot more expensive too. Maybe you sign up with somebody who knows those channels and who's a lot more well-versed in that, and they'll shop you around. The trouble is, if you're an up-and-coming indie artist, you don't have a ton of disposable income for that kind of thing. Most of us are rocking the starving artist motif. Sure. So I think it's just about being smart. If you are going to channel funds, be really targeted. Understand who your demographic is. Understand where you fit in. We touched on earlier that there's clearly some sort of like melancholy underpinnings under a lot of our stuff, right? One of the most successful playlists that we got placed on is called Sad Songs 2022. We got so much traction, so many new listeners, all from that. We've also taken a lot of
I don't even think they picked a sad song.
No, I think maybe sad as compared to the rest of our library.
Oh,
yeah. You're right though. They didn't pick our saddest thing, but it took off. It gelled with their audience really well. They still have it up in a really favorable spot. So it's been getting continuous exposure for us. On top of that, we're definitely capitalizing Instagram, put out some really fun covers where we take things. Chris had a great idea when the Taylor Swift album dropped. We're talking about something that took like 1 through 10 on the Billboard chart when it dropped. Like it was like every song on there became a single. It was so successful.
Yeah.
He took I believe it's the first track on the album, right?
Yeah.
And said, I think we should cover this. And this was very quickly. I came over, he plucked out some piano chords. I started to write a guitar line. We threw a bass thing underneath it, or just drums underneath it. Posted that, and it got tons of traction, like 3,000 views in a very short amount of time, just by putting this out there. So I think it's also capitalizing on momentum that's already there. You can take something and say, like, we're going to put a Lowcats treatment on that. And it definitely got a lot more people congregating to us.
Interesting. It's amazing. And as I said earlier, it's yet another thing that independent artists need to think about as you start to navigate the current modern music scene. Like you've got to wear so many hats.
It's just necessary. It's like if it was up to us, we wouldn't have anything to do with any of that, but you have to play that role if you're going to succeed. And I think, sometimes it's kind of easy to be like somewhat prideful about it and just say I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put out my good music, and if people like it, then they like it. And
if you build it, they will come.
Yeah, and it's just not that way anymore. You just have to kind of play the game. But you also have to, you got to kind of fight the battle of not losing yourself in it, because we could just post a bunch of popular covers on TikTok, every week, and we would probably blow up. But we don't want to be a cover band. We don't. Right. That's not what we're trying to do. So we do have to kind of play that game, but not play it too much.
Right. You're renting your soul, not selling it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just there's so much to do, though. I mean, that's the other thing. Mm-hmm. Even young people getting into it. I mean, you guys are not old, but there are younger guys than you coming in, and they might not know all this.
Oh yeah,
younger artists coming in.
Well, and you're also competing, kind of on that point. You're competing with younger people who understand that world better than you do. Yeah. had so many just misses, like oh, we're gonna put this video out there and this is cool because we think it's cool, and then no one cares about it at all.
Yeah.
We put one out that I think got like 60 views or something like on TikTok.
Wow.
So it was just like no one cared at all, and we thought it was cool. It was like a whole animation that we did. Like we put time into it, and no one cared about it. So you just have to understand the world, and you're competing with these other people who do understand that world.
Yeah. Again, shouting into the void. It's like, and this is me just, not caring too much, but I mean, you say it only got like 60 views. I'm like, shit, there's 60 people in the world who actually watch what out there in the world. Sure.
But, on TikTok though, it's you're always scrolling.
Yes.
So that just means it popped up on someone's feed 60 times. It doesn't mean they actually went and found it, looked us up and found our thing.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. But you have to figure out this is kind of what you do. You have to figure out what works and what doesn't work and kind of lean into that direction. Yeah.
Well, guys, as we start to close things out, what's coming up for the Lowcats? What you got going? I mean, this podcast is coming out in February, so we're going to be in the new year by the time this is released in the beginning of February 2023. What do you guys got coming into the new year?
First and foremost, definitely keep an eye out. There are two of my favorite things that we've been working on. These are things that are going to kind of push our sound into a new direction. One is going to be the first song that we wrote in 3/4 for this operation. Okay. Chris and I have messed with odd meter a lot in previous things, especially in that progressive rock range. But this is something that kind of harkens back to a really sweet old soul sound that we put our spin on. I love the direction. I think the messaging is beautiful in it. And then the counterpoint to that is this dance anthem that we're coming out for all those who just want to stay inside. So those will be coming out, as well as nailing down the live presentation. Obviously, we can't wait to kind of show everybody around. We know a few people with the So Far Charlotte scene, if that's something you're familiar with. So hopefully doing a couple shows like that. But yeah, anything else you can think of?
That's pretty much it.
I've got one question for you guys. You sent me over a link tree.
Yeah.
It's got all links to everything.
Yeah.
Website. Do you guys have a Lowcat website?
We do. It's in the works.
Okay.
I mean, really,
I didn't miss it.
No, you haven't missed it. It's just not live at the moment.
Gotcha.
But it's in its final stages. So probably within the next week or two, we'll probably have something out there.
I thought it was like, man, am I just old school? I got a website, and the new thing is not to do something. So
yeah, I mean, that's kind of true though. There are a lot of people who just don't do that. But but it's so easy to nowadays. Like we just thought, why not? And that's where we have some merch potentially coming out and stuff like that. So
great. I look forward to it.
Yeah.
All right, fellas. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Queen City Music Podcast, and much luck to you guys in 2023.
Thank you so much, man. We really appreciate you having us on.
Take care. Thanks for listening to episode 65 of the Queen City Music Podcast, and I hope you'll go back and check out past episodes. And if you'll be so kind as to leave us a review, I'd greatly appreciate it. You can find the QCMP on all your favorite streaming platforms. As always, if you'd like to be a guest on the QCMP, or if you're a business and like to sponsor the podcast, reach out to me at qcmusicpodcast@gmail.com. Also, check out our local partners, Records on the Wall at rexonthewall.com, Reporting from 20XX at reportingfrom20xx.wordpress.com, Queen City Live at Instagram.com/Queen City Live Music, and Charlotte New Music at charlottenewmusic.org. Until next month, be well and stay safe.